Ever wondered why we yawn all day, but dream of changing the world in a major way? It's the Bored and Ambitious Show.
1626. An island at the edge of known maps, a deal that would echo through 4 centuries and shape a city that never sleeps. But before there was Manhattan, there was Mannahatta, island of many hills. For thousands of years, the Lenape people knew every contour of this land. They built villages along its streams. They harvested oysters from beds so vast, the shells would later pave the streets we call Pearl. Their fishing weirs crossed the rivers. Their trade routes stretched to the Great Lakes. This was no wilderness waiting to be discovered. This was home, complex, cultivated, alive. 3,000 miles east, a different world was being invented. The Dutch Republic, small, stubborn, impossibly wealthy. In 1602, they created something the world had never seen, the Dutch East India Company, the first multinational corporation. Shares traded publicly, profits split among thousands of investors. It was capitalism, weaponized. By 1621, they wanted more. The Dutch West India Company received its charter, licensed for the Atlantic trade, enslaved people, sugar, and furs. Amsterdam became the center of global commerce, a sanctuary for religious refugees, a place where money mattered more than bloodlines. And now, their ambitions turned toward a river an English explorer named Hudson had found 12 years before. The company men studied their maps and saw opportunity. The Hudson River, a silver highway cutting deep into a continent thick with beaver. One pelt in Amsterdam could fetch enough to feed a family for a week. And this island at the river's mouth, perfectly positioned between the English to the north and south. Make no mistake, this was not about building a nation. This was about building profit. Every decision measured in guilders, every risk calculated against return. Peter Minuit was not born Dutch, he was born practical. Raised in Wessel, a trading town on the Rhine, he learned commerce the way other children learned prayers. By the time he sailed into the Hudson River in May of 1626, he carried no conquistador's sword, no missionary's cross, only a merchant's instinct that the best empires are built not through conquest, but through contract. Sometime in 1626, the exact date lost to history, goods changed hands on the shores of Manhattan, 60 guilders worth. Not worthless trinkets, as legend claims, but practical wealth, iron tools, cloth, copper kettles, items the Lenape genuinely valued. But here is where 2 worlds collide without realizing it. The Dutch saw signatures on a deed, permanent, absolute, European. The Lenape? They understood something entirely different. In their tradition, land could no more be owned than the wind. What they offered was access, shared use, a relationship, not a transaction. Neither side was lying. Neither side was cheated, not yet. They simply stood in the same moment, speaking past each other across an unbridgeable divide. Everything we know about this purchase, everything, comes from a single letter. A Dutch merchant wrote home in 1626, mentioning almost casually that Manhattan had been bought for 60 guilders. No deed survives. No Lenape account exists. Just one letter, scratched in iron gall ink, that would become the founding myth of a city and a nation. The Lenape were no strangers to negotiation. For generations, they had brokered agreements between nations, managed shared hunting grounds, resolved disputes through protocol and patience. They were not naive. They were operating from a world view that had served them for thousands of years. When they accepted Dutch goods, they were not selling their homeland. They were, in their understanding, welcoming neighbors. The tragedy is not that one side deceived the other. The tragedy is that both sides walked away, believing they had understood. This pattern, agreement without comprehension, would echo across 400 years of American history. Valid or not, the paper was signed. The Dutch now claimed Manhattan, at least in their own eyes, and claims once made must be built upon. The real work was about to begin. From the mud of Manhattan's southern tip, a fortress takes shape. Dutch engineers, masters of building on impossible ground, drive timber pilings deep into the marshland. Stone walls rise, a counting house appears, then a church, then a trading post. Beaver pelts flow out by the thousands. Bricks and glass flow in. Windmills catch the Atlantic wind. Stepped gable houses, unmistakably Dutch, line dirt paths that will one day carry millions. In just 3 decades, wilderness becomes city. In 1660, a Dutch cartographer creates something remarkable, the Castello Plan, the earliest detailed map of New Amsterdam. And here is the revelation. Look closely, and you'll find modern Manhattan hiding in plain sight. De Heer Straat, the Gentleman's Street, runs the length of the settlement. Today, we call it Broadway. The Breed Weg becomes the Bowery. A canal that Dutch settlers dug for drainage? Canal Street. These names aren't accidents. They're fossils. Trace any Manhattan street back far enough and you'll find Dutch footprints in the bedrock. The grid came later. The soul was here first. 1653. Tensions mount with English colonists to the north. The Dutch response? A wall, 12 feet high, built of wooden planks and earthworks, stretching across Manhattan's width. A barrier against invasion. The wall stood for nearly 50 years, then came down in 1699. But the street it created? That endured. Traders gathered there. Merchants made deals. Today, that muddy path where a defensive wall once stood moves more money than most nations. Wall Street, born from Dutch fear, transformed into global ambition. The Spanish built colonial capitals with grand plazas and radiating boulevards, monuments to empire. The Dutch built something different. Their streets followed trade routes, not ideology. They packed buildings close because land was precious and commerce was king. No grand imperial vision. Just practical people solving practical problems. This mercantile DNA, this organic, almost accidental density, became New York's inheritance. It's why Manhattan feels alive in ways planned cities never quite achieve. The chaos isn't a bug, it's the original feature. Walk the muddy lanes of New Amsterdam in 1643, and you would hear something extraordinary. A visiting priest counted 18 different languages, spoken by just 500 people. Dutch merchants haggling with German farmers. Walloon refugees sharing news with Scandinavian sailors. English traders, African workers, and Sephardic Jews from the Mediterranean, all crowded onto the southern tip of a small island. The English colonies to the north demanded religious conformity. But here, the Dutch West India Company had a simpler creed. If you could work, you were welcome. Prophet recognized no accent. In September 1654, a battered French vessel limped into the harbor. Aboard were 23 refugees, Sephardic Jews fleeing the Portuguese reconquest of Brazil. They had nothing but the clothes they wore and centuries of persecution behind them. Director Peter Stuyvesant was disgusted. He immediately petitioned Amsterdam to expel these deceitful enemies of Christ, but Stuyvesant had miscalculated. Back in the Dutch Republic, Jewish shareholders had invested heavily in the West India Company. And money talked louder than prejudice. The company's response was swift. The Jews would stay. They would trade. They would worship as they pleased. It was not idealism. It was business, and it created the first Jewish community in North America, a community that would help shape a nation. Stuyvesant's words still sting across the centuries. He called them hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ. But the company's response established a pattern that would echo through American history. When Quakers arrived, Stuyvesant tried to ban them. Amsterdam overruled him. Catholics? The same. Again and again, prejudice proposed, profit disposed. Commerce became an unlikely guardian of conscience. Make no mistake. Dutch tolerance was not born from moral enlightenment. It was strategy. Amsterdam had learned a profitable lesson. Persecuted people brought invaluable gifts. The Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain? They brought Mediterranean trade networks. French Huguenots, fleeing Catholic persecution, master craftsmen and capital, religious refugees arrived with skills, with savings, with connections spanning continents. Diversity wasn't charity, it was competitive advantage. And in New Amsterdam, this cold, commercial logic created something unexpectedly warm. A prototype for the American experiment itself. A place where who you were mattered less than what you could do. But we cannot tell this story honestly without confronting a harder truth. In 1626, the same year Minuit arrived, the first enslaved Africans were brought to Manhattan by the West India Company. Slavery was present from the beginning, woven into the colony's foundation. Yet even here, New Amsterdam was different. The Dutch practiced something called half-freedom. Enslaved people could earn partial liberty, own property, even sue in court. By the 1640s, free black landowners held farms in what is now Greenwich Village. This was no paradise. The brutality of slavery touched everything. But the rigid racial caste system that would define the American South had not yet hardened. In these early decades, the boundaries were still being drawn, and some found room, however small, to build lives of their own. In 1647, a new Director General arrives, and you can hear him coming. Peter Stuyvesant. A Caribbean cannonball took his right leg. Dutch stubbornness gave him a wooden one, silver-banded, striking the cobblestones like a drumbeat. He is fierce, devout, absolutely certain he knows best. For 17 years, this one-legged autocrat will drag New Amsterdam toward order, battling drunkenness, demanding fences, fighting pirates. He serves the company, but increasingly, the colonists serve only themselves. December 1657. Stuyvesant has banned Quaker worship. These trembling radicals offend his reformed faith. But in the village of Flushing, something remarkable happens. 31 colonists, none of them Quakers, pick up a quill and sign their names to defiance. They call it a remonstrance. "We desire not to judge lest we be judged," they write, invoking the law of love, peace, and liberty. This is not theology. This is rebellion. These farmers and tradesmen are declaring that conscience belongs to no company, no director, no king. 130 years before the Constitution, ordinary people in a muddy Dutch village wrote the rough draft of American freedom. The company wanted workers. It got citizens. These colonists had crossed an ocean, buried children, survived winters. They would not be managed like inventory. They demanded courts, representation, a voice. And here's the thing about the Dutch. They came from a republic. Civic participation wasn't radical. It was home. Reluctantly, the company yields. Schepens, aldermen, begin meeting. Local courts convene. New Amsterdam is becoming something the directors never intended, a community that governs itself. By the early 1660s, New Amsterdam hums with success. Merchants prosper, ships crowd the harbor. But success attracts attention. English colonies press from north and south, and in London, a king's brother studies maps of this Dutch prize, this valuable, vulnerable, practically undefended island. In 1664, English warships will appear on the horizon. Everything is about to change, and nothing will. August 1664. 4 English warships glide into the harbor like sharks scenting blood. Colonel Richard Nichols commands 450 professional soldiers, battle-hardened, well-armed, hungry for conquest. On the crumbling ramparts of Fort Amsterdam, Peter Stuyvesant raises his spyglass with trembling hands. What he sees turns his stomach to ice. He has 150 men, walls rotting from neglect, barely enough gunpowder for a single volley. The mathematics of war are merciless. But Stuyvesant grips his sword and turns to face his colony. He has never surrendered anything in his life. He will not start now. Nichols sends his terms: surrender peacefully or face bombardment. Stuyvesant's response is immediate and violent. He seizes the document and tears it to shreds before the gathered crowd. No negotiation, no compromise. They will fight to the last man. But the crowd does not cheer. These are not soldiers. They are merchants, bakers, shipwrights, people with children sleeping in wooden houses, with warehouses full of goods, with futures they refuse to burn for pride. 93 leading citizens sign a petition demanding Stuyvesant negotiate. 93 names against one man's defiance. The old soldier stares at the document, this rebellion of pragmatism, and something breaks behind his eyes. His shoulders fall. The sword he clutched so tightly slowly lowers. The surrender terms were astonishingly generous. The Dutch could keep their property, their language, their religion, their customs, all existing contracts and inheritances, honored in full. Why such mercy? Colonel Nichols understood something profound. A peaceful colony generates wealth. A resentful one breeds rebellion. The English didn't want to crush New Amsterdam. They wanted to inherit it, functioning, prosperous, and cooperative. Dutch hands would keep building. Dutch ships would keep trading. Only the flag would change. September 8th, 1664. New Amsterdam becomes New York, named for the Duke of York, the future King James II. A simple renaming. Signs change from Dutch to English, but look closer at the streets below. The same faces, the same accents, the same stubborn, enterprising spirit. Even Stuyvesant stayed. The fierce old soldier retired to his farm, a 62-acre estate called the Bowery. He would tend his pear trees until his death, watching the city he built continue to thrive. Under a different name. Listen to America speak, and hear the Dutch. That cookie you're eating, koekje. Your boss at work? Baas. The coleslaw at the barbecue? Koolslaw. Even Santa Claus descends from Sinterklaas. Brooklyn remembers Brooklyn. Harlem echoes Harlem. The Bronx? Jonas Bronx farmland. And when you sit on your stoop snooping on the neighbors over waffles, every single word is Dutch. Beneath the chrome and concrete, the old paths endure. Broadway, that restless diagonal slashing through Manhattan's grid, follows a Dutch wagon trail carved 4 centuries ago. Stone Street, where traders once haggled over beaver pelts, remains the oldest paved road in New York. Bowling Green, where Dutch cattle grazed before the first auction, is now the city's oldest park. And Wall Street? It traces the exact footprint of that wooden barrier built to keep the English out. The wall fell. The name stayed. The Dutch drew Manhattan's first lines, and New York has been walking them ever since. But the deepest inheritance isn't written on maps or spoken in borrowed words. It lives in ideas. When those ordinary colonists in Flushing demanded freedom of conscience in 1657, they planted a seed. A century later, it bloomed in the First Amendment. The Dutch welcomed Quakers, Jews, and refugees not from idealism, but from pragmatism. Profit required peace. Commerce demanded coexistence. Yet something remarkable happened. What began as tolerance for profit became tolerance as principle. When millions of immigrants later poured through New York Harbor, they entered a city whose founding DNA said, Come as you are, work hard, and belong. The Dutch built a trading post. They accidentally invented the American dream. In 1602, Amsterdam invented the modern world, the first stock exchange, the first multinational corporation, shares you could buy, sell, and trade, risk distributed, fortunes made. When Wall Street's traders shout across their floors today, they're performing rituals perfected on the Amsterdam Beurs 400 years ago. The Dutch didn't just settle Manhattan, they wired it for capitalism, deal-making, risk-taking, the audacious belief that tomorrow's wealth can be traded today. New York became the financial capital of the world because it was founded by people who invented finance itself. The Lenape were pushed from Manhattan, but they were never erased. Today, their descendants thrive in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, nations scattered yet unbroken. In recent years, something remarkable has begun. Lenape elders return to Manhattan, not as ghosts, but as witnesses. Their language, Munse, once silenced, now echoes again in classrooms and ceremonies. The word Manhattan appears on new maps, new buildings, a name 8,000 years old, finding its way home. That legendary purchase, 60 guilders for an island, was never simply a swindle. It was a collision. Two worlds met at the water's edge, each operating by rules the other couldn't see. The Lenape did not believe land could be owned. The Dutch could not imagine otherwise. From that fundamental misunderstanding, tragedy and creation emerged, intertwined, inseparable. The deal that founded New York also founded a question America still asks: whose land? Whose story? The answer is more complex than heroes and villains, and 18 languages spoken on those muddy streets. Today, 800. The trading post never stopped trading. The tolerance gets tested with every generation, and every generation renews the choice. Look closely at New York, the commerce, the chaos, the audacious diversity. Beneath the glass and steel, Dutch fingerprints, invisible, indelible, alive. New York's character was not inevitable. It was chosen. Chosen by Dutch merchants who valued profit over purity, and discovered that tolerance was good business. That choice echoes still, in every immigrant welcomed, every deal struck, every dreamer who steps onto this island believing anything is possible. 60 guilders bought more than land. It bought a template for a city, for a nation, for an idea that refuses to stop becoming. I knew Amsterdam, 1626 to 1664, 38 years on the map, 400 years in the city's soul, its spirit, still trading,